Whatever happens tomorrow, you must promise me one thing. That you will stay who you are. Not a perfect soldier, but a good man.
The MCU wouldn't be what it is today without its amazing trilogies over the years. Trilogies that have shaped every fiber of its being and impacted audiences just as deeply. It's these trilogies that made Avengers Endgame one of Marvel's biggest achievements. And honestly, when you look back at how the MCU formed its identity, these trilogies are the spine, the backbone, the blueprint that showed the audiences what long-form superhero storytelling could be outside comics. At the start, there were only 3 characters who defined the trilogies of the MCU, and that task was handled by the MCU's Trinity: Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor. These 3 didn't just carry movies, they carried entire eras. Their trilogies formed the cultural language of every early MCU hype. And now in later years, we have Spider-Man in there, the Guardians of the Galaxy, and before I forget, even if I wish I could, Ant-Man. With all these amazing trilogies and Ant-Man, there's still one truth I believe in, one ideal I'll continue to live by, and something I'll defend even if I'm the only one who has to stand on that hill. In all of the MCU's history, the trilogy that brought out the best in the MCU will always and has always be the Captain America trilogy. Because out of every trilogy Marvel made, from cosmic comedies to teenage multiversal crisis, nothing hits with the same consistency, emotional honesty, and sheer narrative discipline as Captain America's trilogy. And here's why. Every trilogy in the MCU has at least one weak movie. For some, one bad movie. For others, two. It's this thing where they start off weak and end up great. Or they start great, slip in the second film, and try to bounce back in the third. Or they start great and just fumble all the way through. It's a whole thing. One thing that defines a good trilogy for the audience is how much better it gets from its start to its end. And for most MCU characters with trilogies, it hasn't always been that straightforward. Some trilogies evolve naturally, others feel like they are desperately correcting course, just like Iron Man 1, which was a great movie. Absolutely fantastic with its setup and characterization of Tony Stark. Iron Man 2, on the other hand, became a mixed bag, having extremely weak villains and not so consistent story direction, especially considering what came before. Iron Man 3, I could argue, is a tad better and frankly a movie I really enjoyed, but it still didn't hit the same way Iron Man 1 did. Maybe because it didn't deliver on what was expected, I don't know. The Iron Man trilogy basically spanned around the full spectrum of quality, a masterpiece, a mid-quel, and a hot take magnet. One of the big problems in the Iron Man trilogy, without going too deep into it, is the reputation in villains. They always follow the trend of being someone Tony Stark neglected or betrayed in the past who comes back for revenge. We saw that in Iron Man 1 with Obadiah Stane, Iron Man 2 with Ivan Vanko and Justin Hammer, and Iron Man 3 with Aldrich Killian. Thor, the same pattern shows up. The first movie, great, a strong introduction and a character-defining moment. His arc of learning humility was honestly inspiring to me. Then Thor: The Dark World came along, and to be honest, I thought it was pretty good, except I was like 11 by then, so don't take my word for it. But with a bit of research, you'd easily see that the movie wasn't well received at all. But Thor Ragnarok, on the other hand, was basically a better movie. It revived Thor's character, brought better action and comedy, and overall made for a solid trilogy. But still, his entire trilogy wasn't consistent. It reinvented Thor, rebuilt him, then broke him again later. Meanwhile, among this MCU's trinity, Captain America is the only one who doesn't fall into the same pit. Cap is the only one whose trilogy doesn't feel like 3 different directors arguing about tone. His first movie, Captain America: The First Avenger, isn't exactly what you call a masterpiece, but it's not a bad movie either. It's solid. The movie did exactly what it was supposed to do. Let us know who Steve Rogers is as a person, nothing more than a good man. The First Avenger worked because it's character first, it's patient, it's earnest in a way MCU movies rarely are anymore. Since it was the MCU's first prequel movie, it also had to make Captain America relevant in the main MCU timeline, and it did that perfectly. Without that World War II story, Captain America would have just been a guy with abs and patriotism. The context makes him iconic. However, even though the movie was good, it still had weak spots. A not so impactful villain, underwhelming action, and a lack of showcasing Steve's physical capabilities. Instead, he mostly relied on gadgets, and the film glossed over the achievement he made in the movie through montages. It's a film that hints at greatness but doesn't fully flex it. But honestly, they are nitpicks. Honestly, weren't disappointed, they weren't expecting too much either, but they weren't also blown away. It sat comfortably in the middle, which was a great start for a character like Captain America, especially considering he wasn't one of Marvel's biggest names. And all of this was the start of something greater. It set the table for what would come in the future. So before explaining how Captain America went from being just another Marvel character to an instant fan favorite, look at these 2 men right here, the Russo brothers. Anthony and Joe, who took charge of Captain America after Joe Johnston, not to completely change the character, but to evolve him, taking what came before and amplifying it. Their proficiency with Captain America was why they were later handed the responsibility of directing even bigger MCU films. If there's one thing that made the Russo brothers successful in comic book movies, it's that they are fans just like me and you. They have read comic books, they understand the characters, and to me that's essential for any director handling a comic book movie. It just makes sense, unlike a certain director I know. But that advantage helped them turn Captain America into one of the MCU's best characters. They took what worked and amplified it, and took what didn't and gave it meaning. They didn't run from Steve's simplicity, they weaponized it. And proof of that is in their Captain America films after the First Avenger, The Winter Soldier and Civil War. Captain America The Winter Soldier was different, maybe even better than the First Avenger. People often call it a spy thriller, and honestly, that vibe worked perfectly for this movie. It didn't just work, it elevated the MCU. Suddenly, Marvel wasn't just doing a superhero movie, they were doing a political thriller with superheroes. The action was the biggest standout to me. It immediately fixed one of my issues with the previous movie, The First Avenger, which lacked impactful combat. Captain America didn't feel like a super soldier in that movie. He felt like a normal dude, which made me so excited when the Russo brothers decided to, amp him up a little bit in his movies going forward.
Component that we wanted to bring to the character was this modern component of, how do you deal with enemy combatants in closed spaces, combinations of fighting styles.
The Russo brothers highlighted everything Steve was capable of. He wasn't someone to play with. We see him jump from a plane with no parachute, throw people around like ragdolls, or just straight up kick them like ragdolls, take their entire squads and stand on top of the unconscious body or family. I mean, come on, you can't tell me this wasn't cool as hell. But the story was just as impactful. A matter of time trying to understand the world after modernization, navigating new social norms while being nostalgic for what once was. Steve's struggle wasn't just physical, it was existential, grieving a world that moved on without him, while he still carried morals from a century that no longer exists and will never exist. At first, Steve thinks he's just doing what he's always done, fighting bad guys. But as the story deepens, he realizes the world is no longer simple. Morality has become layered and confusing, and now his best friend, who doesn't even remember him, is the enemy. It's such a leap from what came before. Captain America goes from a simple world where morality was straightforward to a world where nothing's black and white, basically overcomplicated. The MCU grew up through Steve Rogers. Winter Soldier matured the entire franchise. Captain America the Winter Soldier laid the foundation for everything that would follow. That's why, to me, I consider this movie one of my top 5 favorite MCU films, and I know a lot of people can agree that just deserves to be up there. So after Avengers Age of Ultron, we return to another Captain America movie, Captain America Civil War, often called Avengers 2.5, and well, they are not wrong. But the MCU is a shared universe. Characters showing up in solo films isn't a bad thing if it serves the story. Civil War wasn't just a crossover, it was a collision of ideologies wrapped in superhero branding. The MCU's first true family breakup. Civil War was like the mega-sized superglue holding the MCU together. As a Captain America film, especially after Winter Soldier, fans were ready to eat this movie up, and it even became more exciting when it became clear to fans that Black Panther and Spider-Man will be in these movies, which brought way too much hype for this movie, if I'm being honest. And the movie delivered everything it was promising. Everyone knew what the title meant, Cap versus Iron Man, and with the MCU constantly building tension between them from the First Avenger to Age of Ultron, it was time to make them clash. It wasn't just fists versus repulsors, it was trauma versus duty, accountability versus autonomy, guilt versus loyalty. At least until the plot shifted into two grown men bullying an orphan because one of them killed his parents. I'm just saying. The Avengers 2.5 argument is valid, but the movie still never stopped being a Steve Rogers story. It's about whether you'll stand for justice and truth even when the odds are stacked against you, even when you have to fight the people closest to you. And the villain also is pretty interesting because he's not a super soldier, he's not an overpowered character, although in the comics he kinda is somewhat dangerous than just a man who has extreme trauma, but still. He's just a man with a brain, grief, and a plan, and with that he uses his intellect to completely split the Avengers and manipulate Cap and Iron Man into beating each other senseless. That alone gives Zemo so much respect as a villain because technically he's the only villain who actually won, except you bring in Infinity War. Overall, Civil War is an immaculate movie and a powerful closure to Captain America's trilogy. Civil War didn't just end the trilogy, it cracked open the entire MCU. So now that I've gone on about each Captain America movie, what's the bigger point? Why do I still consider Captain America's trilogy the best in Marvel? Well, because throughout his trilogy, Cap has the best character arc in the MCU. This trilogy isn't just 3 films, it's one long story about a man trying to stay himself while the world keeps changing around him. Steve Rogers has one of the best arcs in the MCU, and only a few can rival him, that being Tony Stark and Tom Holland's Spider-Man, which come close, but Cap's arc still stands out. Sure, the ending of his story was controversial, but it still worked for the character. From the first movie, we are told a simple story. A man weak in body but strong in spirit. He was willing to fight with nothing but heart. And when he finally got the strength he'd always wanted, he didn't stray from who he was, a good man. Steve's muscles didn't change his morals, they magnified them. When he arrives in the 21st century, he's overwhelmed by how much has changed and what he's lost. He went from fighting ordinary soldiers to fighting aliens, meeting gods, being exposed to a way advanced tech and institutions he can't fully trust. The world he knew was gone and he had to adapt. But that's easier said than done when tradition no longer works, where holding on to a moral code creates opposition, and while the world tries to make Steve waver, he stays true to himself, true to being a good man who does what's right no matter what. Steve's arc is the tragedy and triumph of staying pure in a world that rewards compromise, and that's the highlight of all 3 of his movies. Captain America's trilogy is more coherent and synergized than any other MCU trilogy. Iron Man and Thor come closest, but their trilogies feel inconsistent because of changes in directors and tone. Iron Man 3 is a very different movie from the first 2 films, while Thor's trilogy shifts drastically, especially Ragnarok, which took a comedic turn that later hurt Thor's character in Love and Thunder. Consistency is the secret sauce of good trilogies, and Cap's trilogy tastes the same from start to finish, but just richer. Compared to Spider-Man, Ant-Man and Guardians of the Galaxy, some of which people consider the best trilogies aside from Captain America's, but to me, Captain America's trilogy still stands tall. Even those trilogies experiment heavily with tone, Cap's doesn't. His story is clean and a continuous thread. Captain America's trilogy doesn't waver even with a change in directors. The tone remained the same. The Russos took what worked in the first movie and improved it, crafting Steve's arc across all 3 films and delivering beautifully in the end. It feels like one filmmaker planned all 3 movies at once, even though they didn't. That's how smooth the evolution is. So yeah, I know I've said a lot. Maybe it's because I love Captain America, or maybe the MCU made me love him even more with his movies, and I know this video might be contrary to what others believe is Marvel's best trilogy, but opinions and opinions, I have mine, you have yours. To me, basically Captain America's trilogy is the best part of the MCU. So let me know yours in the comments what you think. Which MCU character has the best trilogy, and if it's still Captain America, tell me what you love most about his. But if it isn't, let me know which one you prefer. And hey, if you enjoyed this video in any way or took anything from it, feel free to drop a like or so you don't miss any future uploads or just to help grow the channel. Until next time, I'm out.